he alluded to the Constitution of the United States. This document is the greatest in history, based on religious principles, on Christian doctrine. And in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it is clearly stated that our inalienable, some say unalienable, rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these are our inalienable or unalienable rights because they were granted to us by God, not by government. Government, however, does take them away from us. This is unconstitutional, especially without due process. But we have men in our government, executive, legislative, and judicial branches, some from this state, who would expand or contract the constitutional government or the Constitution like an accordion to include or exclude whatever points they were trying to make or trying to withhold. Now, this is wrong. It is unconstitutional that this be done, and when it was mentioned that government is inefficient, I think one of the best governments in the world is a government that is inefficient. The most efficient government would be a totalitarian government. Being the past, you don't know what's going or why until the knock on the door, probably after midnight. But as written, with our legislative, judicial, and executive branches of government, as per Constitution, with each checking and balancing the other, it is not supposed to be an efficient government, but a good government for the people. For example, if a stinking proposal were made, by the time it clears the checks and balances, the people at the grassroots level will have known what's going on and would have a right and a chance to call a halt. Sometimes I wish it were so as in Greece many years ago. When a senator made a proposal of any sort, he made it on a box with a rope around his neck. If the proposal were good for the people, they removed the rope. If it were not, they removed the box. I have made a list of people on boxes that I would just love to kick the boxes, and these people on the way down in case the rope didn't work. On the hospital costs, Dr. Quinlan didn't mention that within the last few years, hospital employees were forced under the minimum wage, which meant that some of the employees who couldn't pour that stuff out of a boot had to immediately present themselves for a raise in pay. Now, when you have to raise all employees a certain amount because some bureaucrat tells you you must pay it, whether they earn it or not, for goods or services rendered as in a free marketplace, the price of everything else goes up. When the hospitals work 24 hours a day and on 8-hour shifts, and now with extra time off, they've even changed Washington's birthday from the 22nd to whatever Monday falls after the weekend. Now, I haven't heard yet about July the 4th, but according to the calendar, it will be here tomorrow. And that's the date that I'll celebrate, regardless of what some stinking politician tells me. This kind of reminds me of a church down in Dr. Moorhead's area. the Board of Deacons were meeting, and they decided that they wanted to buy a chandelier. And of course, they had to order it from Sears Roebuck in Memphis. One of the deacons stood up and says, "Us can't order no chandelier." Says, "There ain't a member of the congregation knows how to spell it." Another says, "That's right." Says, "Us can't order it." Says, "If we could spell it," said, "there ain't enough money in the kitty to pay for it." Another one says, "If we had the money to pay for it and somebody could spell it and we could order it," says, "there ain't a person in the congregation that could play a tune on it." Well, the preacher tried to keep his dignity, and he stood up and says, "Y'all all right," says, "and while y'all was talking," says, "I was a-thinking," says, "I was a-thinking that us don't need no chandelier," says, "what this church needs is more light." We have tried to shed a little light on the stinking situations that we find ourselves in day after day after day. Now, the members of the panel could talk for 3 weeks on any of the subjects that have been mentioned. They could also tell you about Vietnam. They could tell you why Vietnamization is a surrender, pure and simple. They could tell you why that they will probably settle on the 17th and 19th parallel as decided 30 to 40 years ago by the communizers. They could tell you why your gold is falling off in value, why you cannot own gold, why it is illegal for you to own gold, why any foreigner can buy abroad gold at the world rate as decided by supply and demand, but why you cannot own it because the politicians tell you you cannot. They would also tell you another reason why the Vietnam situation parallels the Korean. They know, too, that we have not won a war since we have been a member of the United Nations. They know that this is not by accident, it is by deceit and design. They know, too, that you American people have got to learn that war is not the answer. They know that you've got to learn that once you get in a war, which is not the answer, that you can't win it. They've got to teach you that if you want to win it, you couldn't win the peace. And I don't mean the peace as Khrushchev in his crowd talk about lack of opposition to communism. These men have done their homework, and if you would like, we could have a question and answer period and let you direct questions to any member of the panel, and I'm sure your answer will be right on the money, and I'm sure, too, that it will not parallel the opinions of the self-appointed experts elected to Congress and the Senate. You know, there was a time when each of these senators and congressmen were lay folks like you and I. They didn't have sense enough to determine their destiny, but all of a sudden, after winning the popularity contest, they were experts on everything immediately and overnight. You don't get the knowledge and experience that quickly, but they pull the strings and they use the hatchet, and we see it more and more every day. Please ask some of the members of the panel questions on these subjects. Thank you.
To the position and his responsibility in case he happens to be a member of the AMA or his future role with the AMA. What is, I'd like to have their individual feelings regarding the position's responsibility and participating in the AMA he is currently a member.
All right, we'll start off with, I can take that, and I think this is an individual problem that the physician will have to work out to the best of his ability. Number one, his primary responsibility is to his patient. No other third party, period, whether it be colleague, government bureaucrat, politician, or hacky on the block. Number one, his primary responsibility is to his patient. Now, whether or not he remains a dues-paying member to AMA, which, by the way, now has less than 50% of the doctors as dues-paying members, he'll have to make that choice. Some feel that he can fight better from the inside if he stays in, keeps his contacts, and tries to change policy from within. Those who are members of House of Delegates on the trustees, and a damn good conservative rarely gets that high, may have some opportunity to do so. But those who are not members of House of Delegates, etc., and cannot influence the representatives from their state, they'll have to decide. Now it has come to the point where who speaks for organized medicine? Frankly, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons speaks for me. Now, as far as I'm concerned, their philosophy is terrific. But I am bitterly opposed to any organization trying to think for me. Speak for me is one thing, but they cannot think for me. Did that answer the question? Dr. Kane?
Dr. Dorrity, I cut out of U.S. News and World Report for July the 5th this very interesting boxed remark. It said that for 124 years, the American Medical Association has been identified as a spokesman for the nation's doctors. Now, for the first time, less than 50% of practicing physicians in the U.S. of A are members of the AMA. And the question was asked as to why this happened. It said, this is the reason. The doctors coming out of medical schools feel that the organization is too conservative politically. Did you know that? Did you realize that, Dr. Dorrity? Too hidebound to represent the new generation. Will something be done? The question was asked, and an AMA vice president predicts this, quote, "We will move with the times, and members who left will come back. New members will recast the AMA to conform with changing times." So, Dr. Dorrity, if you are not happy with what's happening in the AMA now, just wait a little bit.
There's one other factor about this, too, that should be understood. In some states, such as in Illinois, you're involved in a union checkoff situation where you cannot belong to your local county medical society unless you also pay dues to the AMA. And this can get to be a sticky problem with regard to maintaining hospital privileges. Legally, you can still do it, but in most places, most hospital staffs, even though it may not be able to enforce it by law, require membership in a county medical society to be a member of the hospital staff. And in many states, this membership is predicated upon payment of AMA dues. New York recently changed their situation and allowed AMA membership to be voluntary, whereupon they lost something like 9,000 members in New York.
Just a brief remark. I don't think that doctors at all have any objections to the position of the American Medical Association so far as the scientific side of medicine. However, the American Medical Association at one time had a good part of the American doctors as members, and these doctors are salaried and fee-for-service. The American Medical Association cannot possibly represent all doctors politically, because we have the full spectrum of beliefs, of positions. There are doctors that work full-time for government, so there's a great diversity of ideas. So when it speaks on political matters, it usually ends up trying to be in the middle, and the final result ends up is let's accept as little socialism as we can. The AAPS says we don't accept any socialism.
This little thing about a little bit of socialism, you know, is kind of like a little bit of pregnancy. There's no such thing. It keeps growing and growing, and when you see some of the monsters that are born, it will knock your head off in more ways than one. A lot of the hospitals do have as a requirement for membership on the staff that you be a member of or be eligible for membership in your local medical society. Now, there's a question now as to what determines eligibility. Does belonging determine it, or somewhere else along the line? Now, a lot of the hospitals are going to have presented within the next short while amendments to the Constitution and bylaws. I know one particular that's going to get it. I've already started it kind of under the counter type at the Methodist Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. Number one, it's closed shop. It won't stand up in court, and unless they change the laws, the antitrust laws, that will have to be knocked down in court. But I promise you one thing, you better beat it at the local level, and you better beat it soundly at the local level. If it gets to the Supreme Court, God knows what will happen to it.
Do you want to wind up?
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Dr. Quinlan, I see that criticism not all from the patient's point of view of the British medical system was very bad in reference to home visits and doctor's visits to the home. That when a patient is actually hospitalized, it's not quite that bad. In fact, a lot of people come from the outside, and I've known people flew over to Scotland to receive medical treatment from the United States and so on. Also, another point, I'd like to know what is the situation with regard to Irish medicine, not British.
First of all, with regard to your question number one, house visits. This is something which is discussed very often. Doctors don't make house calls, that type of thing. Basically, nowadays, the house call is still being made, but it's being made a lot more selectively than it used to, and so it should be. A house call of convenience is very inefficient. It's time wasting. You do not have the facilities at home to examine a patient properly like you should do. An individual who will ask a doctor to come to the house because she's got a bridge game scheduled that afternoon rather than go to his office, this type of thing is very inefficient. Furthermore, a doctor can see 4 patients probably in the time he's doing one of those house calls. Probably he might even see more. And I mean, examine them well. There is a certain element of time involved here, apart from the efficiency of the thing. Now, in Britain, you have to understand the situation has one big difference. Long before the National Health Service came in, as a matter of fact, as Dr. Moorhead has pointed out, from 1911, you have had a division of the hospital from the general practitioner. The general practitioner, by and large, except in some of the what they call cottage hospitals, never did enter the hospital at all. If his patient required hospitalization, that patient was sent to the hospital where he was taken care of by specialists. And this was under the old voluntary system. When the National Health Service came in, this was altered so that the hospital specialists, the hospital-based specialists, were paid a salary. Now, the demand, of course, for beds in the hospital increased enormously with the advent of the National Health Service. I have often been asked by patients of mine what I thought of Cook County Hospital in Chicago. This is the largest hospital in that area, and it has several thousand patients. It's a teaching hospital which is used by several of the medical schools, including our own. And private patients don't want to go there. Now, the standard of care in Cook County Hospital, in my experience, is far higher than in some of the hospitals I've been in England of similar caliber. Now, don't misunderstand me. There are places where there are marvelous things going on in Britain, of course. There are marvelous places in Russia, too. But I'm talking about the general overall care. The other thing you have to remember is that under the British National Health Scheme in hospital, you have no choice of physician. You may have acute appendicitis, we'll say, You are hospitalized for that. The man on call does the admission diagnosis. He does the workup. The surgery is done by whoever's on call. And it isn't necessarily a consultant. It's done usually by one of what they call registrars, which is a senior resident.
When the Duke of Windsor needed surgery, he came to the United States. When Anthony Eden needed it, he came to the United States. When Fassel needed some surgery on his boy's eye, he came to the United States. Now, these men were not trying to save a few bucks. They could have gone to the moon if they had thought they could have gotten better care there. They came to the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a pleasure for us to appear before you today. We've loved every minute of it. We consider it a privilege, any chance that we have to say a few favorable words for God and country and individual responsibility. We regret that it is necessary that we all have to take the time, the effort to promote something that is so great and so highly cherished by all of us. And it is heartbreaking to see the things that we all hold dear being chipped away and chiseled away by the numbers, by plan, by deceit, and by design. We've got to remember, too, that we can't lose 5% of our freedom, but 20 times, then we have absolutely none left. We cannot compromise on principle. We have no intention of doing so. Thank you so much for letting me speak.